Hi, and welcome to My John 17 for Life. This is a Christian podcast about finding your calling, understanding God's will, and learning how to live a life of purpose through faith and obedience. John 17:4 says, I have brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do. And that's the heart behind what we do here. Because so many of us are asking, what is my purpose? What is God calling me to do? And how do I know if I'm living in God's will? And sometimes we don't need more pressure, we need clarity. In this podcast, I sit down with real people from all walks of life, moms, business owners, pastors, creatives, and everyday believers who are learning how to follow God, hear His voice, and walk in the purpose He has for their lives. If you've ever felt unsure about your direction, overwhelmed by life, or disconnected from your purpose, you're in the right place. Hi, Tina. Thank you for coming on today. I appreciate it. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your walk with God.
So, my name is Tina Yarger, and I have known Jesus my entire life. However, there's a difference between knowing Jesus and knowing about Jesus. And so, most of my life, I knew about Jesus, and I didn't quite grasp theology fully until I was about 26. And I found my own church, built my own faith, actually opened my Bible for the very first time and read it for myself, where previously I would just write on the backs of other people or the pastors that were in front of me. And I put my trust in them and not actually Jesus. And so really where my faith was transformed was when I decided to actually make faith my own, open my Bible, do my own reading and research, and get serious about my faith. And so now I am a pastor at my church leading a recovery ministry. I feel like God has shaped my career path. He's led me to become a clinical counselor. And so that's kind of what I do full time.
Wow. There is a big difference because I grew up going to church too. And there's a big difference, that shift when it's like, this is what you've been told. And now God's having you step into your beliefs.
Yeah, and I absolutely had to do that because I lost my both of my parents at a really young age. So I realized
Mm.
how weak my faith really was when I had to go through those trials. And I was so angry at God. I decided I was going to walk away from him. And then God was like, "Okay, but it's not me that you're actually mad at. It's you." And that's when I realized as I dug deeper into my faith that it was a me problem, not a God problem.
Yeah, I understand. I had to come to that point myself too. And it's difficult, but it is worth all of the stress of it. So what was the season in your life that truly changed you and shaped who you are today?
So I was 18 when my dad died. He was an alcoholic. He was an awesome dad. I always said that I had an amazing childhood, and that still is true. And then when I turned 19, I lost my mom to lung cancer. And my faith after losing my dad was still pretty grounded because there was one event that took place after my dad had taken his last breath, and I had walked outside. And this day was super snowy. You could not even see. It was like a whiteout. And as soon as I walked outside, the sky opened and it was so bright. The snow stopped. It was like snow didn't even exist in that moment. And I was like, okay, God, thank you. That was for me. I needed that. And I felt like he was like there and with me. However, the season with my mom was vastly different. I throughout her illness, I had prayed, I had went to church, I had did all of the things that I thought I was supposed to do as a Christian follower. And so when God didn't heal my mom the way that I wanted him to, I felt like he didn't hear my prayers. And so I essentially pushed him to the side and did whatever I wanted to do with my life. And through all of those things, it was used. But I really had to come to a point where I was experiencing anxiety and depression and really coming to the end of myself to realize, okay, God, I actually do need you. And it was actually at a wedding that the guy that was doing the wedding is a pastor. And I'm like, man, this is the most beautiful wedding I've ever been to. I'm like, I think we should start going back to church. So because of this wedding, my husband and my two daughters and I ended up attending his church and we never left. And so that was really the turning point for me to truly know who God is.
When we face trials like that, there is a thread that God weaves through it, a lesson that He's trying to teach us. If you look back at that hard season, what is one thing that God's weaving through all of this, tying it up and putting it right here, right now?
For me, it was trust. It went to the extreme of independence, and I believed that was a strength that I had.
Mhm,
But it was actually, when you look at it from a viewpoint of faith, is actually a weakness because you're not dependent on God anymore. You're dependent on yourself.
mhm,
And so what God used during that time was to teach me to be dependent on him. He ended up taking me on this journey of teaching me to like truly be his daughter. My earthly parents are flawed.
right.
But God's like, "I am your heavenly Father and I won't fail you." And so I had to learn to trust that, even though I felt like I had been failed many times before. And God's like, "Let me remind you, you can trust me. It may not be right now. You may not see the results that you want right now, but keep trusting me and you will see. Trust me with
Mm.
your career. Trust me with your kids. Trust me with your marriage. Trust me with your finances." And that has really been the journey that I've been on.
I know a lot of people who have lost important family members, and they have this, including me, we have this thing in our mind of reaching the same age that that person was when they died. Was that something that you ever had to deal with? Thinking about your mom and your dad when they passed away and you're reaching that age?
Absolutely. So both of my parents, they didn't make it out of their 40s. My dad was 48, my mom was 42. So they were relatively young. I'm 33.
Mm.
And so the idea of hitting 40
Yeah.
is scary. However, I'm not making the same decisions. I'm not living my life the way that they were living their life. I'm leaning into God. I'm leaning into the plans that he has for me. And even though it's scary, even though there is some fear there, it's
Right.
not something that I'm going to allow to consume me
Mhm.
because I know that I have a job to do. And regardless, I'm still going to trust God in that.
That makes a difference. That 40 age is hard, that switch over. Mentally, it's hard. After you've gone past it, trust me, you'll be fine.
Yeah. Looking at it now, I'm like, 40s seemed to be old when I was a teenager.
Mhm.
Looking at it now in my 30s, I'm like, it's not old."
Older than my parents were when I made them grandparents.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's a crazy thing to think about. What has God called you to in this season of life? Tell us about that.
So I have my hands in a lot of things in this season. I wear a ton of hats. So just taking it back a couple years on this journey, I have an undergrad degree in early childhood education. I was a teacher for a time. I got extremely burnt out and I was like, my heart is not in this anymore. But I also was struggling to have purpose because I became a stay at home mom, which I actually really loved. But I realized I hated the way that I felt and I wanted to do something about it. And so I surrendered what I wanted to do to the Lord. And I said, "Okay, God, I'm giving this to you. What do you want me to do?" And while I was in group, my pastor's wife came to me and she says, "Hey, I think you should take your spiritual gifts test. I think you're an evangelist." And I was so skeptical because I'm like, I'm not going to take a test to tell me about my spiritual gifts. I fully believe that God would reveal that to me.
Mm.
So, God has a sense of humor, right? And
Right.
so simultaneously, this is where I'm like on the journey of reading my Bible cover to cover. I'm not kidding you. The next day, I'm reading in First Corinthians about spiritual gifts. And I'm like, "Okay, Lord, I'm listening. I hear you. I'll take the test." So I took it and still skeptical. I'm like, "Okay, maybe if evangelist is on here, maybe it's legit." So I took it. Sure enough, evangelism's on there. And so I'm like, okay. And the test that I had taken had a list of career fields that would fit that gift. And so as I'm praying over this, I'm like, okay, Lord, like, what is it? And I felt like he highlighted counselor because of all the things that I had went through in my life, losing my parents. I'm watching some of my friends spiral into alcoholism and dealing with mental health issues, and I'm like, "Okay, I know this is for a purpose, but what can I do about it?" And so when he highlighted counselor, I was like, "That's it. That's how I'm gonna make a difference." So I'm not kidding you, I probably called like 50 schools to get into. I narrowed it down to 2. One was in Ohio, one was in Georgia. The one that was in Ohio was the most expensive school that I have found. And so I ended up calling them actually and talking to them, and they asked about like my grades in my undergrad, and I ended up qualifying for like a 25% discount. So it actually
Wow.
made it the cheapest school. So I'm like, "Okay, Lord, I see you. Here we go." And simultaneously, while I'm trying to go through school to become a counselor, I also was like, "Okay, maybe I can start a group for people that are struggling with addiction. And I felt like God was like, that's not big enough. And so I was
Mm.
like, okay, then what do I do next? So I'm talking with one of my cousins that lived in Texas at the time, and she's like, you need to look into Celebrate Recovery. And so I looked it up and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. This is it. This is what we're going to do. And so eventually I met with my pastor, and through some processes, he's like, okay, I'm going to order this for you. And I'm like, great. But I'm not leading this. I have no leadership skills. I'm not equipped to do this. And he's like, oh no, you're going to do this. And I'm like, okay, great. I'm the girl that hates speech class. I'm sick when I have to give a speech. There is no way that I'm doing this. And I felt like God was like, you just have to trust me.
Mm.
And so I'm like, okay, I will be obedient and I'll do this. And we did that. And so we launched Celebrate Recovery in 2022. And 2 years down the road, I'm like, you know what? I'm feeling a little bit constricted with the rules that Celebrate Recovery requires us. And so I transformed it into what we call the gathering now.
Okay.
And it has been absolutely amazing. I absolutely love it. And so we feed people every single week. We have groups. We have a large group worship and teaching service. And then every once in a while, we have people come in and share their testimonies. So that was kind of like my development in leadership season. Now I feel like I'm in a season of conquering.
Mm.
I've learned all the things. And so now God's like, I want you to go get my people. I want you to go. I want you to evangelize. And so I went to my pastor and I was like, you know what? I want my title to change to restoration and evangelism pastor because I want to do more than just a Wednesday night service. So now I'm teaching people how to evangelize. I'm in the process of developing a training for that to just bring people in, teach them what it means to be an evangelist, how to share their faith appropriately, and how you can take that into street ministry and evangelize to the broken people of our community. So, the other part of this is there is a movement happening in our town called Godsfield. So, where I'm at is called Mansfield, and we are renaming it Godsfield. And so, what this is we are uniting all of our churches in our community to come together as one body with Jesus as the center. So in March, we had 31 churches that hosted 31 nights of prayer, different denominations, different types of church services. Anybody from the community could come. And it was an incredible time of transformation, repentance, and just being together as the literal body of Christ. And it was absolutely beautiful. So that's part of it. The other part is in 2020, I felt like the Lord was like, you're going to write a book. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm going to write a book? What does that mean? And so I put it off for all of these years and I finally sat down and started writing this book. And the idea of it is to share my story, but also helping people who are grieving different areas of their life, whether that is death, whether that's a divorce, whether that's a friendship, a job, whatever that looks like in grief. And I take my story and then I take my clinical knowledge and I put it all into one and give people practical tips and tricks to help them through their grieving season. And so I released that on March 4th, which is also my dad's death date. So that has
Wow.
been quite a journey. God just amazes me.
Writing a book is a big thing. What is your book called?
It's called Roots That Remain: Life After Grief.
Yeah, I see that. Grief is hard. Even when your faith is strong, it's still hard to keep that trust that God is so good, even in the dark places.
Yes. And it's funny because I'm like, the cover has a story in and of itself. I was actually sitting in my brother's house and I'm like, I kind of like the look of that tree. I think that would make a great cover. And so I snapped a picture of it and I'm like, yeah, that's the cover. And as soon as I like put it onto paper, I'm like, you know what? That's an olive tree. I'm like, you know what? That is symbolism in itself because anointing comes from the crushing of the olives
Right.
and the oil from that. And so I'm like, how perfect. Because there's a time where people go through grief and they feel like they are completely crushed and hopeless and sometimes can't even see a way out. But there is hope because something good can come from that. And that is my hope for people. is to see, even though this feels really bad, God is still in the story and God is still healing and God still has a plan.
The obedience that it took to do all the things that you have done, what does that look like in real life? Not this big picture of I obeyed, but like the real life nitty gritty of it.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of tears, which was difficult for me because after losing my parents, I have two younger brothers. So I kind of took on this role of caregiver. I have to be strong for my brothers, which
Right.
means I can't show emotion, I can't show weakness. And so on my journey of growing in my faith, my heart had to soften. I
Mhm.
had to understand that true strength is actually breaking, and true strength is actually being vulnerable in what you're feeling and experiencing, and not taking your story to use it as a victim, but using your story to help others. But in that, it took me, there would be days that my husband is like, "Are you okay? Because you are just losing your mind." And I'm like, "Yes, I have all of these built up emotions from all of these years that are coming out that I'm now allowing myself to feel." And I think one of the hardest emotions for me to experience was anger because
Mm.
society says anger isn't a good emotion. We shouldn't express that. Or maybe there's some unresolved issues from the person that you lost, which I also experienced with my parents. And I'm actually in that season now of just being angry at them. Being angry as, like, why did you make the choices that you made?
Right.
But the true freedom comes from allowing yourself to feel those emotions instead of
Hmm.
trying to stuff it down and not feel it. And it's actually caused me to heal a lot quicker. As the emotion comes, you recognize it, you feel it, you go through it, you give it to the Lord, and you allow Him to walk with you through those vulnerable times. And what I found is that the healing is smoother, quicker, and easier when you go through that, which sounds the opposite of what you would think you would experience when you just stuff your emotions down. But science has taught us clinically when you don't express or feel your emotions, it gets stored in your body. So now you experience things like stomach issues, migraines, body aches, and I don't want to feel those things. I want to feel healthy. I want to feel the best that I can. And so the healthy thing to do is experience the emotion when it comes.
I can vouch for the anger thing. My oldest daughter asked me if I've ever been so angry that I wanted to smash things, and I was like, no. And she was surprised because of all the things that I've been through. But I came to realize I wasn't allowed to have anger. It was that anger is bad, anger is sinful, anger is. But God got angry.
Yes, he did. And
God
there's
is
a
full of
difference.
emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. We see it. Jesus wept. He experienced the full spectrum of emotion. And what I try to teach people is there's a difference between reactive anger and responsive anger. The reactive anger is the more lashing out, throwing things, versus the responsive anger where you stay in your logical brain and can actually feel it and express it appropriately.
Okay. That makes sense. I like that because you have to have that balance and know where your anger is coming from in order to project it correctly instead of, I call it shooting buckshot. Because when you shoot a gun for deer hunting, it just sprays everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great analogy.
I tell my kids, your feelings are valid, but you're not allowed to shoot them like buckshot all over everybody else because
Yes.
it's not right and it's not fair. Stepping into your calling is always going to cost you something. What has stepping into this calling that you have right now cost you?
I think the biggest thing that comes to mind first is I lost a lot of friends. I don't have a lot of the same friends that I had. And I think when I talk about like the grieving process, like I have had to grieve those friends.
Yes.
I've had to grieve them for many reasons. One, because we don't see eye to eye anymore. We don't really have much in common anymore. But I also grieve for their eternity as well.
Mhm.
I still love them very deeply, but there's a point where I decided to go all in with Jesus, and it meant that this was the path that I was going to continue on no matter what
Mhm.
happened. The other side of that is it requires a lot of time, a lot of sacrifice of yourself. Heart work never stops. It's like God reveals one thing to you, you work on it, and then he's like, here's something else that I need you to work on. And so this is a sanctification process, right? So it's like
Mhm.
always pulling things out. And through that, you experience those emotions that come with it. You have these
Mhm.
realizations that you didn't realize you needed to have, and maybe sometimes in that, even the motives of other people. Like, there's been
Yes.
times even with, like, my own family where my husband and I kind of, like, took off in our faith and got serious about it before a lot of our family, so we didn't have essentially the same worldview per se, and so, like, the way that we were living was radically different. They didn't understand it, and at times it has caused divides in the family to the point of, like, having to cut them off for a season and then reconcile, which, praise the Lord, has been so fruitful because I'm so proud of, like, my family that have ultimately decided to repent and dive
Mhm.
deep in their faith, and now they're healing, and it seems like our relationships are getting stronger. So even your faith is gonna cost you not only your friends, but even some family at times.
The point of the podcast, my John 17:4 life. That's Jesus's prayer, and he says, "I have glorified you on earth. I've completed the work that you've called me to do." What does that look like for you to finish the work that God has given you?
I don't feel like there's necessarily going to be an end point for me. It will be when I take my last breath. The hope is to hear Jesus say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's when I know my work will be completed and that I have done it well. That's what I hope to do until my last breath. My grandmother, she's an amazing example. She has done street ministry for so many years. I'm walking in her footsteps and I didn't even know it. And she didn't share some of these things with me until I really stepped into ministry myself. And she's in her 70s, and this woman, I'm not kidding you, loves the Lord so much that she could be woken up at midnight and she's out on the streets finding whoever the Lord has led her to find. I'm like, "Grandma, you cannot do that." But, like, that's her, like, she's faithful to her calling, and she has set that example, and that's the example that I hope to follow, and I hope ultimately my kids will follow in those footsteps as well.
There are a lot of people who are afraid of their calling because the imposter syndrome, the cost. Some people understand the cost. Or even the things that I've heard are, God wouldn't call me to that. That's not it. Or the last one is women who are married, they're called to something that their husband's not called to. And there's a struggle that happens in their marriage. What would you say to these people?
That has been a lot of my experience too. Early on, it was, "God, I can't do this. I'm not equipped. I
Mm.
don't like speaking to people." And it's in the I can'ts and the I don't want tos that God is going to develop you. At least in my story, that's what God has done. I have put myself through exposure therapy to get to where I'm at now. I'm not afraid to speak in front of people anymore like I was. I still get nervous at times, but it has become a lot easier. And I think what has helped me the most is I'm more fearful of the disobedience than I am of what could happen to me in the obedience. And so that's kind of what has, like, gave me the motivation to keep going in ministry.
Mhm.
My plan was never to become a pastor. I had no desire to do that. I know what that calling is. It's a burden, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of prayer, a lot of tears for the people that you're overseeing and shepherding. So it is hard. And I think if God would have revealed all of those things to me from the
Mm.
very beginning, I would have been a coward and I would have definitely been disobedient. And just so I think there's something beautiful in not having all the answers or not fully understanding what
Mhm.
you're about to walk into when God is calling you. And it's okay to feel all of those feelings. It's okay to be afraid. The most important tool that I had was my support team. It was my small group. It was especially my husband, because bless his heart, watching me go through all of those emotions and him not even fully understanding himself. And so, like, the dynamic of a wife being called to something while the husband may not
Mm.
rings true for me in my marriage. However, my husband is so supportive of everything that I do, and so supportive that he helps me on Wednesday night ministries with our safety team, and he has done a phenomenal job of discipling these men and showing these men that they are appreciated and organizing a team. Like, I never have to worry if we're going to have a safety team on Wednesday nights. And so, like, as a man, even though he wasn't necessarily called to the ministry that I'm called to, men love to be protective. They love to provide. And so, like, this role for my husband, it's my wife is protected.
Right.
This ministry is protected. And so for him, it's just as fulfilling as it is for me.
So it was not, I have to be in the front, but I am protecting what's mine and what's important to me. That's the role that
Absolutely.
he switched into.
Yeah. And actually, so the reason I even went through the ordination process is because of my husband. I was still in my master's program and I was also developing this ministry at the time. And I had this immense guilt that I could not possibly do one more thing because it would take away from my family.
Hmm.
However, I still felt in my heart that I needed to go through that process because it would open doors for me. And so I prayed. I was like, Lord, I said, if this is something that you want for me, I need you to
Yeah.
tell my husband. And so I'm sitting in our kitchen one morning and I'm reading my Bible and he just sits down next to me and he's like, I need to tell you something. And I'm like, okay, what are you going to tell me? And he's like, I think you need to tell Nate, which is our lead pastor, that you'll do ordination. And then we both are weeping. We're just crying together. And I'm like, okay, I'll do that. I think for me, that was the nail in the coffin that
Hmm.
this is what God had for me. This is what I needed to do. And this is what God was calling me to do.
Some people think that when you step into your calling, that it's like everything's fine, everything's easy, and it's not.
Oh,
Because
no.
there are hardships along the way because you are dealing with people and people are hard. Individually and as a group, it's hard. How has God shown up when you just wanted to quit? Like, I'm done. I am done. This is not going to work. How has God shown up for you in those times?
Yeah. So for me, it's about every other month. And it's a very, very real thing. And I think when you're called to ministry, you have to remember the journey that God brought you on and where you are. So I always have to go back and like remember this is the journey you've been on. This is the relationship you have built with God. And also, like, staying rooted in my Bible has been such a key thing because when I do get into those valleys, it seems like every time I open my Bible, it's like God has something for me and it jumps off the page and it's a constant reminder of you are still where I want you to be. You are not to give up. And so staying rooted in prayer, and it sounds so cliche, but for me it's the truth. And sometimes even the littlest things, it could be one of the other staff members coming into my office and writing an encouraging message on the board and it's like, okay, God, I see you. Thank you for sending that person to encourage me to keep going. And so even though those little things of encouragement and appreciation are just
Mhm.
little reminders, I call them little kisses from God.
Well, you've talked about a lot of things, but is there something that you wish I would have asked you that I didn't, that you
Um,
think everybody needs to know?
so I think the biggest takeaway is just
Mm,
start. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to understand. You can be completely confused and still say yes. God will equip you along the way. It may not be a fast growing process that we as humans like to have. He's not a fast food God, he's a crock pot God. We're going to be developed slowly. So trust the process even when it doesn't make sense. Even in seasons of your life that are really hard and you're questioning that, God, are you even good? Because he is and he will show up. And I think about Habakkuk, which ironically I'm reading about right now. And a lot of people are probably going, why? Well, in the first chapter of Habakkuk, he talks about seeing all these injustices and all these horrible things that are going on in the world. And he's asking God, why are you allowing me to see these things and experience these things? And God says, I'm sending an army. And Habakkuk goes, surely you're not going to wipe us out. And, sometimes, Habakkuk in his human mind is like, this doesn't even make sense. I thought you were a good God. And then he climbs up on his watchtower and he's like, I'm going to wait for your answer. I'm going to wait for you to reply to me. And so I think in our faith, we can become so complacent waiting for God's answer. But don't be quick to give up because he will answer. It could be years. I mean, look at Abraham. Look at his
yeah.
story. It was years. So stay faithful in your call. Stay faithful in what you're asking from God because he's going to show up for you, whether that's healing, whether that's a job offer, whether that's something for your child. And sometimes the way our prayers are answered are not the ways that we want them to be answered. And I so badly wanted my mom to be healed. And
Right.
I was Habakkuk asking God, why? Why didn't you heal my mom? And I would ask that question over and over and over again because I could not understand why a good God would leave me in a world without my parents.
Yes.
But here's the thing, God is a big God, and He wants you to come to Him with those hard questions. The
Mhm.
questions you feel like you shouldn't ask, God wants to hear those questions. Because what I found was my mom got ultimate healing. She
Right.
got to go home and be with the Lord.
Mhm.
She wasn't healed earthside, but she was healed eternally.
Mhm.
And I think that's the part that we fail to understand when, especially when death happens, because that's when
Right.
so many people are like, why? Or their faith diminishes. But it's like we forget that God sees everything and understands everything. Selfishly, we want our loved ones with us, but there's something better waiting for them. And I can guarantee you, if I went up to heaven and I asked my mom, would you want to come back down here and be with me? She would say no.
There's a word for being able to hold opposing views at the same time, and I cannot think of what it is. It'll come to me later. You are holding joy and grief at the same time, and a lot of people think you can't do that. You can't be joyful and grieving at the same time because they equate joy and happiness as the same thing, and I learned that in my grief, that I was joyful for my grandmother, but I was not happy about her being gone. And that's a hard, deep lesson.
It absolutely is, but I think there's so much freedom
Mm.
in that viewpoint as well. I think we can get stuck in black or white thinking, and we forget that there can be a gray area, and that gray area is joy and grief at the same time,
Mhm.
and maybe even some other emotions thrown in there as well.
Juxtapose. That's what it is. They're juxtaposed. They seem opposite, but they can be held at the same time. That's what it is. I knew it would come to me. So at the end of every interview, I ask a question that either an audience member asked or a past interview asked. So the question I have for you is, when you look through your life and everything you have done, how do you see that God has used your education and your life experiences, tying them all into this neat bow of what you're doing right now?
Yeah, I think he's using it all. It couldn't line up any better for me because my career is my ministry.
Mhm.
And I knew that when I walked into my internship and the owner of the company says, "I used to be part of Celebrate Recovery on the leadership team." And I was like, "Huh, this isn't by accident." And so when I surrendered completely and gave that completely to God, it all came together. And honestly, I could not be more joyful in the seasons, in the hard seasons, the good seasons, all the
Mhm.
seasons. I'm just grateful for what he has done. And it's hard work. It's a lot of hard work,
Yeah.
but it's all necessary work. And I don't think it would mesh so beautifully if I hadn't surrendered.
Well, you are a teacher and now you're writing curriculum. You
Yes.
got your master's in counseling, which whatever field you're going to go in, you're going to need all of the things. So God uses all of the things that you've done in what you're doing now.
Yeah. It even goes back as far as 5th grade when I was in all-star cheerleading and everyone got an award and it got to the end and I was like, "Where's mine?" And there was a part of me where I was, like, so sad, and they were like, "We have one more award, and it's a leadership award." And that was the award they gave me, and I didn't understand why. I still don't fully understand why, because I was, like, this awkward kid that just I was quiet, I just did what I was told, and so I didn't understand that, but looking back on it now, that was God even preparing me then. And even, like, there would be friends that I had along the way, like, I had a really good friend in 5th grade, and he comes from a really rough background. There would be times that food wasn't always available, and I he would come to my house, and we would feed him, and so, like, just, like, those things then are things that I'm still dealing with now.
I will tell you, John Maxwell says that leadership is influence. People think that leadership is like being a boss and being on top of people, but leadership is influencing people to do what they need to do. So that's
Yes.
what they saw in you then that you didn't see in yourself. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Tina. I really appreciate it, for sharing your story and giving encouragement that even in the hard things, God has plans for us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. If this episode encouraged you, gave you clarity, or helped you think differently about your purpose and what God is calling you to do, I would love for you to follow the podcast, share it with someone who might need it too. Because the more we talk about faith, obedience, and living in God's purpose, the more we begin to recognize how God is working in our everyday lives too. And if you're in a place right now where you're asking, what is God calling me to do? How do I find my purpose? How do I hear God's voice more clearly? I've created something for you. It's a free guided resource called Living Out God's Purpose, 21-day journal and prayer prompts. It's about helping you slow down, quiet the noise, and begin to realign your life with what God is already speaking. You can download it for free using the link in the show notes. And just remember this as you go, you don't have to do everything. You just have to be faithful in what God has given you. That is what John 17:4 means. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next episode.